Yes, I guess that is working. Well, it's 1 o'clock, so welcome. This is the second Civil War talk. The question, I'm not going to try and back this up just in case the remote doesn't work. But the question for this lecture. How about Jesus? Can you hear me now? Okay. All right. Well, okay. I guess you almost have to have this in your throat. Welcome to the second lecture, the second question. The question was on the first slide that I'm not going to try and back up and show it because I don't know if this is going to work. But the question is, did you know that Lincoln's law clerk was the first Union officer killed in the Civil War? And that person is Elmer Efren Ellsworth. And this is what Lincoln thought of him. He called him the greatest little man I ever knew. Now, most people don't know anything about Ellsworth, yet at the time, he was probably at least as popular as Lincoln was in 1859, 1860, and in certain parts of the country, maybe even more popular. Yet his name has kind of been lost to history. Now let's see if this really works. Okay, it does. All right, we're in business. Lynn, can we dampen the front lights, maybe? Elmer was born in Malta, New York on April 11th, 1837. This is his home in Malta, which is actually still there. He was the son of Efren Ellsworth, who was a tailor, and Phoebe Denton. Malta, it's about 8-9 miles from Saratoga, New York, upstate New York. As a child, he read everything he could find on military tactics, and he had aspirations of becoming a professional soldier. But his limited schooling, due to his impoverished family, made it impossible for him to apply to West Point. There's a picture of Elmer. Or so Elmer always told his friends and wrote about. But a new book that came out last year by Meg Rowling, entitled First Fallen, she was able to find a number of Ellsworth's letters and documents and a large portion of the love letters that he wrote to his fiancée. And as it turns out, the family wasn't as destitute as Elmer thought it was. It was true that in the panic of 1837, the tailor business collapsed, and Mr. Ellsworth gave up tailoring. But they moved to Mechanicville, New York, which is about 8 miles north of Albany, where he made a decent living as a butcher, and he was successful enough to buy a house in Mechanicville. So not as destitute as Elmer thought the family was. Elmer managed to join a local temperance society by the age of 9, and by 1852, at the age of 15, he was working in a dry goods store in Mechanicville, where the family lived. With a group of his friends, he formed a pseudo-military company called the Black Plumed Riflemen of Stillwater, minus, of course, the plumes for their hats and, of course, minus the rifles. But he enjoyed serving as drill master for his friends, and he used General Winfield Scott's book on infantry tactics to drill his friends. Yet, in spite of all his things military, Ellsworth remained particularly silent in his letters and his family memoirs as to why he did not consider applying to West Point. The family was friends with a well-connected family in Mechanicville, and they had the necessary political connections for an appointment at West Point. but Elmer never really initiated any paperwork for that. At age 16, he took a job as a store clerk in Troy, New York, which is on the other side of the river and 8 miles downstream from Mechanicville. There he attended, worked for a number of years, about a year and a half or so, and then moved to New York City in 1853. In New York City, he attended the drills of the 7th Regiment of the New York State Militia, known as the Silk Stocking Regiment, because sons of wealthy businessmen and politicians joined this regiment. In 1854, he moved to Rockford, Illinois, where he worked for a patent agency. He became friends of the business owner, a gentleman by the name of Arthur Devereaux, who later asked Ellsworth to join him as a partner in the practice. Both men were interested in military affairs and the Zwaves method of drill. Later, both joined the Illinois National Guard. Ellsworth became the drill master of the Rockford Greys, a local militia company, in 1857. And after some success with the Greys, he helped train militia units in Milwaukee and in Wisconsin. Now, by the mid-19th century, the need for armed protection in the country was much less pressing, and militias began to serve other purposes, having little to do with fighting or protecting the country. They were becoming social organizations. They walked in parades, did not march in parades. Marching was too rigorous. They drilled with sticks and corn stalks, if they drilled at all. In larger cities, militias were more likely to attract young men of prominent families who could afford both uniforms, actual weapons, and the dues that needed to be paid to the militia unit. So they served more as organizations where social and business contacts could be made. Alas, for both Ellsworth and Devereaux, they were swindled by one of the connections they made through their militia unit, and their business collapsed, leaving the 20-year-old Ellsworth broke, bitter, and in debt. Ellsworth moved into the Chicago YMCA. Now, the YMCA actually was first established in Chicago, and it provided housing, rooms in which men could read or talk, facilities for them to exercise, and provided a source of camaraderie. He still continued his work with the Rockford Greys as a drill master, but the pay for this was barely enough to pay for his lodgings at the YMCA. In the summer of 1858, he met Carolyn Spafford, daughter of a local industrialist and city leader in Rockford. Carrie was 15 years old, 5'2", had deep, lustrous brown hair and long eyelashes. Her hazel eyes matched Elmer's. They were a handsome couple when the 5'6" Elmer was in his Rockford gray drill uniform. The Spaffords actually approved of Ellsworth, but there was no doubt that he and Carrie were genuinely in love. But Mr. Spafford was concerned about how Elmer planned to support a wife on his small salary as a poorly paid militia drill master. Mr. Spafford suggested that Elmer enter a law office and study for the bar. Now, at this time, there were no law schools in the United States, and lawyers became lawyers by working in a law office and reading, and when they felt they were prepared to take the bar, they could take the bar exam. Although disappointed, the fact that the Spaffords were concerned about him marrying their daughter, they did allow the couple to become engaged in early 1859. Using his militia contacts, Ellsworth was able to tame a position as a law clerk in a Chicago law firm. He lived in the back room of the law firm, slept on the floor, and had a diet of literally bread and water. Now, since he was back in Chicago, he renewed his friendship with some members of the Chicago National Guard cadets. This particular group had disintegrated as a militia unit, and their efforts to attract new members or audiences to watch their drills just disappeared. Ellsworth agreed to become their drill master if the militia team also agreed to learn the Zwav drill. In Chicago, Ellsworth by chance met Charles de Villiers, a former surgeon in the French army in Algeria, who had also served with a Zouave regiment in the Crimean War. De Villiers was also an excellent swordsman and taught at the YMCA. So he and Ellsworth hit it off, and Zouave training and drill tactics now became the driving force in Elmer's life. De Villiers, at the start of the Civil War, will actually go on to command the 11th Ohio Regiment at the start of the war. Just as Ellsworth had mastered and improved the drills of Scott and Hardee, Ellsworth worked with de Villiers to perfect the intricate, complicated, and gymnastic drills that Swabs went through. Now, what the heck is a Zwav? Early in the 19th century, the French army subdued native tribes in Algeria in North Africa. One of these tribes was the distinctly dressed, hard-fighting Zwaves. They were absorbed into the French army, and quickly some French soldiers became attracted to these native units. Within a short period of time, they were made into regular French regiments, renamed Zwaves, and trained to be sharpshooters extraordinaire. Retaining the original costume of the tribe, these soldiers were clothed in a fez head covering, short jacket, long waist sash. The waist sash was about 10 feet long, and they would help each other wind them up. When one would hold the Zouave, the sash, and then he would start turning circles while his associate held it straight. They wore legless pantaloons but leg coverings over the ankles and lower legs. The distinctive uniform allowed freedom of movement compared to the uniforms of the day. If you think of the British at this time, the British were wearing their red wool jackets, the cross braces, and the stiff leather collar that kept their head both upright and unable to turn to either side. So the Zouave uniform was much more convenient for movement. Capturing the public's imagination, these soldiers were painted by artists, and Emperor Napoleon III even created a unit of Imperial Guard Zouaves. The Crimean War of 1854 to 56 found several European nations, including the French, engaged in a bitter war in Russia's Crimean Peninsula. Nothing changes, does it? Here, France's Zouaves came into their own as the most elite fighters of the French army, then considered the world's best army, even by the British. News of the exploits of these colorful, heroic soldiers reached the American public by newspapers and popular illustrated publications like Harper's Weekly. On a more serious military level, reports were filed by George McClellan, Captain George McClellan, who would later go on to command the Army of the Potomac during the Civil War. McClellan was an observer on the scene of the fighting and came to the attention, the Zouaves came to the attention of McClellan, who then reported that back to the War Department in the United States. In fact, so impressed was McClellan that the French Zouave became his beau ideal of the perfect soldier. And McClellan in the Army of the Potomac will have a Zouave guard, a headquarters guard. Ellsworth was now determined to continue on his appointed plan. On May 6, 1859, he tacked up an inspirational message to himself in the back room of the law office where he lived and slept. This is what it said, quote, "So aim to spend your time that at night, when looking back upon the disposal of the day, you will find no time misspent, no hour, no moment even, that had not resulted in some benefit, no action that had not a purpose in it." And next to this inspirational message, he tacked up his day by hour. Wake up at 5 a.m., study law until 10 a.m., copy for the office until 1 p.m., that is, copying transcripts in the law office. Study and copy until 7 p.m., exercise until 8 p.m., go to bed at 8, wake up again at 5 a.m. Now, you notice in that schedule, there is no time period where he says supper or lunch. He literally lived on bread and water. He bought a loaf of bread, and as small as he was, he actually lost weight, on this particular diet with this full 24-hour day. Unlike the tough, hard-living French Zwaves, Ellsworth instilled his own ideals of temperance, athleticism, willpower, and moral stamina, and he made the Chicago Zwaves, the Chicago Cadets, the pride of the Chicago area. He had them outfitted in his version of the Zouave uniform, and then he also wrote a manual for Zouave units entitled "The Complete Instructions for the Recruit in the Light Infantry Drill as Adapted to the Use of the Rifle and Musket and Arranged for the United States Zouave Cadets." In their colorful new uniforms, now renamed the United States Zouave Cadets, they were unveiled for the July 4th parade and demonstrations on a field in Chicago. After the cadets formed their Zouave drill, no other company would take the field. The crowd had gone wild with applause for every new movement that they saw. The Chicago Tribune, which had not been a fan of militia companies, gave a long positive review, which ended with, quote, "All who saw the drill yesterday morning say the company cannot be surpassed this side of West Point," unquote. Word spread rapidly about the Zouave cadets, and on September 15th, 1859, a crowd of 70,000 attended the agricultural fair the night the cadets won the prize stand of colors. This group was becoming essentially a rock group. This is the rock group of the mid-19th century. Militia companies in the Northeast and in the South laughed at the idea that a group of pretentious prairie boys had the gall to call themselves champions, since they had not competed against older established groups. Ellsworth immediately issued an international challenge to any drill company in the United States or Canada to compete against his cadets, putting the stand of colors that they had won up as the prize. Other things were brewing, however, at this time. A month after he issued that, on October 16th, 1859, John Brown was at Harper's Ferry. For Ellsworth, however, the triumph on the drill field in Chicago quickly changed his life. He received an envelope with his appointment to Assistant Adjutant General and Paymaster General for the Illinois Militia. He also was promoted from Major to Colonel Ellsworth in the militia. After Brown's execution and the increasing talk of war, Ellsworth began to consider the fact that local militias were not ready to respond if called upon. He took on more drilling units, including the Springfield Grays, which was commanded by Colonel John Cook in December of 1859. Cook will go on to lead a brigade and then a division in the Civil War in the Union Army. Cook was a friend of Ellsworth from earlier militia days, but Cook was also a good friend of Abraham Lincoln. And Lincoln wanted to meet Ellsworth. After their meeting, Lincoln had a very special interest in Ellsworth and began making efforts to have Elmer settle down in Springfield and study law in his law office. The uncommonly tall Lincoln was fascinated by the uncommonly short colonel and treated him like a younger brother. Ellsworth was only 5'6" tall, but Lincoln called him the greatest little man I ever met. He became a regular at the Lincoln house. To Mrs. Lincoln, he was a replacement for Robert Lincoln. Robert was back east at Harvard. He was the oldest son of the Lincolns, and here was this charming man. So he was He was a Robert Lincoln replacement. The younger Lincoln boys loved him, especially in his drill uniform, and they mimicked drills. Ellsworth did accept Lincoln's offer with one condition. He would agree to work in the law office after his obligations to the U.S. Zwav cadets were met. His friendship with Lincoln ensured that Ellsworth and his Swabs would play an integral part in the presidential campaign of 1860, and also that Ellsworth would successfully pass the Illinois bar. Carl Sandburg, however, reported that one of Lincoln's most important speeches was lost to the world through Ellsworth losing the transcriptions of it. Lincoln also described Ellsworth as, quote, the worst law clerk that ever lived, and the best executive to handle young men that I ever saw. Now, before starting the competition tour, Ellsworth had his cadets sign the Golden Resolutions, whereby each cadet had to pledge under penalty of expulsion and public humiliation. By public humiliation, their names would be published in all the Chicago papers and what they had done. They had to swear that they would not enter a drinking establishment, a house of ill fame, a public billiard hall, or a gambling saloon. They were to wear their cadet badge at all times in the public so that people knew they were the U.S. Zwav cadets, and also would know that I saw a Zwav cadet go into a saloon. So they were marked, so to speak. No militia companies took up Ellsworth's challenge, neither in the North and the South nor in Canada. So Ellsworth decided on a tour of 20 of the largest cities in the Northeast, and this was arranged. In the spring, he raised funds and got businessmen to make donations for the tour. And it was about this time that, this is a picture of his cadets. Yeah. It was about this time that two young men became part of Ellsworth's inner circle, John Hay and John Nicolay. Hay was working as a law clerk in his uncle's office across the hall from the Lincolns, so it was natural for Ellsworth and Hay to meet, and they were about the same age. Nicolay was about 7 years older and was running a newspaper and wrote favorable editorials for Lincoln when Lincoln asked him to serve as his personal secretary. All three men, Ellsworth, Hay, and Nicolay, became close friends and volunteered to work on Lincoln's presidential campaign. Ward Lamont and Lincoln's campaign manager, Judge Ben Davis, asked Ellsworth to organize the Zwav cadets and their accompanying band to march around the Wigwam when the candidate Lincoln was nominated. The Wigwam was the nickname for the large meeting hall in Chicago where the Republican convention was going on to select a candidate to run for president in the 1860 election. Seward had brought one band, such that when Seward's name was thrown into the ring, the band marched around to rally the crowd. Ellsworth brought the flower of Chicago manhood and their many bands, and the newly formed Chicago Wide Awake Club, Republican Young Men's Club, to march around the Wigwam and play for their candidate. So he had the cadets, he had the cadet band, he had the units that he had worked with and drilled in their bands, plus this Republican Men's Club. And the crowd just loved that. The next day, May 18th, 1860, Lincoln won the nomination. Now, the one tragedy that befell Ellsworth around this time was the death of his younger brother, Charlie, who had traveled from Mechanicville to join him first in Chicago and then in Springfield. Charlie would develop typhoid fever and die on June 20th, just a few days before Ellsworth started his tour. On July 2nd, Chicago gave a rousing send-off to Ellsworth the Zwaves Cadets, and the Light Guard Band as they started their 20-city tour. They started first in Illinois in Springfield. Then they moved to Michigan, to the city of Adrian and Detroit, and then on to Cleveland, Cincinnati, Buffalo, Niagara Falls, Rochester, Utica, Troy, Albany, West Point, New York City, Brooklyn, Boston, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., and then turned west again to go to St. Louis before returning to Chicago. That is a rock band tour, okay? Most of it by train, yes. Yeah. In Albany, they beat the Albany Burgesses Corps before a crowd of 25,000 people. I was born in Utica, so I was particularly interested in finding this. There we go. This picture of the Chicago Zwaves portrayed in Utica, New York. Ellsworth Zwaves had great appeal, and the public was thrilled to see the lightning drills of his fabled Zwaves. The regular Army commander of all the armies in the United States at that time, General Winfield Scott, requested a performance of Ellsworth Zwaves at West Point so that, quote, the future officers could see what a real military unit was supposed to look like. You can imagine how that went over with the cadets. But that's what Scott thought of these Zwaves. They performed for President Buchanan on the White House lawn before another crowd of 70,000 people, where the president later remarked, "If war should come, I know where you will be found in the front ranks battling against the enemy," unquote. Men swooned over the handsome Ellsworth, and little boys, including Willie and Tad Lincoln, were dressed in child-sized Zouave uniforms. Banquets, swords, roses by the armful were handed to Ellsworth, who was described as having dark brown hair that fell in careless, clinging curls around his neck, eyes of dark hazel that flashed and sparkled, a face smooth and fair as a maiden's, lips full and red, teeth of dazzling whiteness. Even the skeptical John Hay wrote, quote, "His words were like martial music, his strength extraordinary. He seemed made of tempered steel," unquote. The New York press described his men, quote, this is from I think this was from the Tribune. "A fellow who can climb an 80-foot rope hand over hand with a barrel of flour hanging to his heels, who can set up a 40-foot ladder on end, balance himself on top of it, and shoot wild pigeons on the wing, one at a time, just behind the eye, who can take a 5-shooting revolver in each hand and knock the spots out of the 10 of diamonds at 80 paces, turning somersaults all the time and firing every shot in the air. That is a Zouave." Okay, so that's a description of his Zouaves. Now, the importance of his tour cannot be overstated. It made Ellsworth and his cadets the most famous men of their day. The tour was extremely effective in motivating thousands of men to join or create local militia units. It was not yet a reality, but within a year, men would be marching off to war. The tour successfully raised national awareness for the importance of military preparedness, especially in a country that depended on volunteers to swell the ranks of an army as needed. 49 of the 50 cadets that he took on the tour will serve in the Civil War, many of them as officers. Now you can begin to see Lincoln's interest in him, not just as a law clerk who loses important papers, but a man who knows how to motivate young men. A few weeks after the tour, Ellsworth resigned his colonel's commission and disbanded the U.S. Zouave cadets rather than have them deteriorate under a much less rigorous schedule. He organized another militia regiment of Zouaves in northern Illinois, officered by the best men from his cadets. This group would create the nucleus, for example, of the 19th Illinois Infantry a year later in June of 1861. Ellsworth used his popularity and powerful presence to campaign for Lincoln throughout the North in the election of 1860. His deliberate and impressive manner reminded audiences of that other short-statured orator, Stephen Douglas. Elmer accompanied Lincoln to the election polls to cast his ballot and was with Lincoln as he awaited the election results. Immediately after the election, Elmer redoubled his efforts to pass the bar. Although Mr. Spafford did not pressure him after the successful tour, Elmer himself asked Carrie to consider remaining engaged until he could provide for her as his wife. In 2017, as part of the Illinois Supreme Court effort to preserve old records of the court, the signed oaths of office of newly minted lawyers were discovered, a box down in the basement. In that box included the signed oaths of Clarence Darrow, Barack Obama, and Elmer Ellsworth. His being signed on February 14th, 1861, just days before he left Springfield, and also Lincoln's birthday. When Ellsworth boarded the train to take the president-elect to his inaugural in February of 1861, he was perhaps second only to Lincoln in fame and popularity in the Northeast. Ellsworth had an important role to provide security. He initially wanted to take Swabs from his regiment, but this would have presented too warlike an appearance. Nonetheless, the superintendent of arrangements for the Republican Party specified that, quote, the president-elect will under no circumstances attempt to pass through any crowd until such arrangements are made as will meet the approval of Colonel Ellsworth, who is charged with the responsibility of all matters of this character, unquote. This placed Lincoln in the second or third horse-drawn carriage behind Lincoln and had Republican Party in every city that Lincoln stopped to deliver a speech and attend a banquet. Each local security chief was to consult with Ellsworth immediately upon arrival of the train. When the retinue finally reached Philadelphia on February 20th, without an incident, the local papers praised Ellsworth for his security. But that night, Allen Pinkerton met with Lincoln and a few close members of his staff to reveal information that a plot to assassinate the president-elect in Baltimore had been discovered. While Lincoln went to Washington secretly with Pinkerton, Ellsworth and Nicolay were entrusted with the rest of the president's family as the scheduled inaugural train was mobbed in Baltimore. The plan had been to either kidnap or assassinate Lincoln as the train went through Baltimore. Baltimore had a city ordinance that no steam locomotives could pass through the city. So trains coming from New York and Philadelphia would stop at the station in North Baltimore. The engine would be unhooked. The cars, if the cars were the same wheels were the same gauge as the railroads south of Baltimore, the cars would then be drawn through the city by horses, so you did not have a steam locomotive. That would be the time when Lincoln was supposed to have been either kidnapped or assassinated. Lincoln passed through the city in disguise in it was predominantly what would be considered like a freight train in the early morning hours. And the rest of the family and the rest of the retinue, following the schedule that had been printed, came through Baltimore that same day, but later in the day. And the cars were mobbed, but no one was injured. Lincoln himself wanted to reward Ellsworth. Elmer wrote his fiancée from his sick bed, having contracted measles from the Lincoln boys. He was to be made a lieutenant in the regular army so that he could then be placed in charge of a military bureau. In a letter to Secretary of War Simon Cameron on March 18, 1861, the president wrote about Ellsworth, quote, "You will favor me by issuing an order detailing Lieutenant E.E. Ellsworth of the 1st Dragoons, to special duty as Adjutant and Inspector General of Militia for the United States, and insofar as existing laws will admit, charge him with the transaction under your direction of all business pertaining to the militia, to be conducted as a separate bureau, of which Lieutenant Ellsworth will be chief, with instructions to take measures for promoting a uniform system of organization, drill, equipment, etc., of the U.S. militia, and to prepare a system of drill for light troops adapted for self-instruction for distribution to the militia of the several states. You will please assign him suitable office rooms, furniture, etc., and provide him with a clerk and messenger, and furnish him such facilities in the way of printing, stationery, access to public records, etc., as he may desire for the successful prosecution of his duties, and also provide in such manner as may be most convenient and proper for a monthly payment to Lieutenant Ellsworth for this extra duty, sufficient to make his pay equal to that of a major of cavalry, unquote. Not quite the usual Lincoln speeches that we expect to hear, but you can see what Lincoln had in store for Ellsworth. However, that did not work out. Colonel Sumner, who will later become General Sumner, Command of Corps in the Army of the Potomac, pointed out that to Ellsworth that such a promotion over many junior officers in the regular Army would earn their animosity towards Lincoln. Ellsworth refused to allow that to happen, and he refused the position. So Lincoln found him a job in the War Department, but Lincoln said, "I have been and still am anxious for you to have the best position in the military which can be given you." He wrote that to Ellsworth on April 15th, 1861, which is the same day that Major Anderson from last week's talk, you may remember, left Fort Sumter. The Civil War had broken out at this point, and on April 15, 1861, Lincoln also called for 75,000 volunteers to put down the rebellion. Ellsworth resigned his position in the War Department and went to New York City on April 18th. There he quickly raised in 10 days 1,100 men for the 11th New York Volunteer Infantry Regiment, known as the Fire Zwaves, from the city's volunteer firefighting companies, and returned to Washington with them as their colonel. He wrote, "I want the New York firemen, for there are no more effective men in the country and none with whom I can do so much. They are sleeping on a volcano at Washington, and I want men who can go into a fight now." Sorry. There we go. This was the recruitment poster for the Fire Zwaves. Yeah, right. The picture. And here's a lithograph of the recruitment. The regiment was one of the first to arrive in Washington on May 2nd. Ellsworth could have raised 2 regiments, but he had uniforms and equipment enough only for one. In the regiment's stand of colors was a crimson silk flag, which had been presented by Mrs. John Jacob Astor, and another banner given by actress Laura Keene. Is the marching off Broadway. When they left New York City, they marched down to the docks and boarded the transport ship, the Baltic. If you remember from last week, the Baltic was the ship that evacuated Anderson's men from Fort Sumter. 5,000 firemen, other firemen in the city, marched behind the regiment. Lithograph from one of the newspapers. Now, unlike the Zouave cadets, the Fire Zouaves were unruly, and when they reached Washington, they caused so much trouble that they were locked up at night, literally chained in the House of Representatives. The doors were closed and chains were put through the handles of the door to keep them locked up at night. What they had done in Washington, they would go carousing, go into saloons and eateries, run up a tab, and then tell the innkeeper or the barkeeper to send the bill to Jeff Davis. Yeah, right. They sorely tested Ellsworth's efforts to instill in them the same sense of military discipline that he had put into the Zwaves cadets from Chicago. Ellsworth paid for their restaurant bills and saloon bills and photographs that they had taken of themselves out of his own resources. Now, D.C. firemen had a poor reputation in their ability to respond to fires in Washington. So on May 9th, when the building next to the Willard Hotel caught fire, the word quickly spread that there was a significant fire that was threatening to burn down also the Willard Hotel. The Swabs, in a spectacular feat of daring and rescue, had some ropes. They climbed out of the House of Representatives to second level, came out windows, ran down to the Willard Hotel, confiscated all the fire equipment from the D.C. firemen, and began to put out the fire. They formed human ladders, suspended a man upside down to douse the flames. There's a human ladder here, another human ladder here with a man with a hose. This poor fellow was literally hung by his ankles upside down with a hose to put water on the fire. They put out the fire and saved the Willard Hotel. Their actions so impressed the owner of the hotel that he gave Ellsworth $500 to express his gratitude, and also invited the entire regiment for breakfast at the Willard later that morning. True to his personality, however, Ellsworth donated the money to the regiment to cover the cost of any military decorations which might be earned by the Swabs in the future. Now, after Lincoln had issued his call for 75,000 volunteers, the Virginia State Convention passed an ordinance of secession on April 17th. In Alexandria, Virginia, an excited crowd gathered outside the Marshall House Hotel on the corner of Pitt and King Streets. Attached to the roof was a 40-foot flagpole that attracted everyone's attention. At around 4 p.m., the innkeeper, James W. Jackson, not related to Stonewall Jackson, hoisted the first Confederate flag in Alexandria to cheers and a salvo of artillery. The garrison flag measured 14 by 24 feet, and Jackson quickly spread the word that whoever should attempt to remove it would have to pass over his dead body. Jackson was a middle-aged man who thrived on controversy and had already survived a full lifetime of encounters. He was described as a tall and stout man, powerfully framed and at least 6 feet tall. Quote, his face was remarkable in its expression. Grim, stern, obstinate determination was stamped emphatically on every feature, unquote. He was perhaps the best boxer in Fairfax County, and he was also an excellent marksman from childhood. When word of John Brown's raid at Harper's Ferry had reached Fairfax County Courthouse, he had grabbed his gun and rode to Harper's Ferry to confront the invaders. He arrived after the Marines had rushed the firehouse where Brown was trapped. On October 25th, 1859, just days after the capture of John Brown at the ferry, a local newspaper reported that Jackson had a memento, part of the ear of one of Brown's sons who had been killed in the engine house at Harper's Ferry. In 1860, during the presidential campaign, Jackson had taken an axe to a Lincoln Hamlin flagpole in the town of Occoquan. After that, Jackson had moved his family to Alexandria and had leased the Marshall House from one of the town's notorious slave dealers. The large rebel flag that now flew over the hotel was visible from Washington and the White House with a spyglass. In order to protect his flag, Jackson prepared in his backyard a 4-pounder cannon loaded almost to the muzzle. He had requested Captain Kemper, later to become General Kemper, participate in Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. He requested Captain Kemper of the Alexandria Artillery to aim the gun so that a fired shot would travel into the house, down the hallway, past his office, out the front door. Kemper questioned him about this. Jackson replied, of anyway, and that he would be willing to die knowing he had taken 15 or 20 Yankees with him. Now, by May of 1861, Alexandria was becoming an armed city. There were troops on duty in the city, including the Richmond Guards, the Madison Courthouse Guards, the Fairfax Cavalry, the Fairfax Rifles, the Loudon Guards, the Warren Guards, the Warrenton Rifles, and the Old Guard Cavalry. Many civilians, expecting the city to be attacked, left the city to the Confederate troops there. On May 23rd, Virginians voted to ratify the Ordinance of Secession. Of the 1,089 ballots cast in Alexandria, only 106 opposed it. The Potomac River now separated the Union from the Confederacy. On the evening of May 23rd, that same night, Union soldiers checked arms and penned hurried letters to loved ones and prepared to cross the long bridge over the Potomac. The goal was to occupy Alexandria before the Confederates could fortify the city and threaten Washington, D.C. Ellsworth wrote a poignant letter to his parents. Camp Lincoln, Washington, D.C., May 23rd, 1861. By May 23rd, they had been moved out of the House of Representatives and were camped on the hillside across the Potomac opposite Alexandria, named Camp Lincoln. My dear mother and father, the regiment is ordered to move across the river tonight. We have no means of knowing what reception we are to meet with. I am inclined to the opinion that our entrance to the city of Alexandria will be hotly contested, and I am just informed a large force have arrived there today. Should this happen, my dear parents, it may be my lot to be injured in some manner. Whatever may happen, cherish this consolation that I was engaged in the performance of a sacred duty, and tonight, thinking over the probabilities of tomorrow and the occurrences of the past, I am perfectly content to accept whatever my fortune may be, confident that he who noteth even the fall of a sparrow will have some purpose even in the fate of one like me. My darling and ever-loved parents, goodbye. God bless, protect you, and care for you, Elmer. He also wrote to his betrothed, Carrie, that if anything should happen, quote, just accept this assurance that the only thing I can leave you, the highest happiness I looked for on earth, was a union with you. I love you with all the ardor I am capable of. God bless you, unquote. Ellsworth's favorite officer, Captain John Wildey of Company I, came into his tent and asked why the colonel was delaying. The regiment was all set to move. Elmer answered, quote, I was thinking in what clothes I shall die, unquote. He took a new uniform, fresh from the tailor, and said, if I am to be shot tomorrow, and I have a presentiment that my blood is immediately required by the country, it is in this suit that I shall die, unquote. About 1:30 a.m., the National Rifles prepared to secure the Virginia end of the Long Bridge. When Confederate pickets saw the 1,000-man force crossing, they ran back to Alexandria. By 2 a.m., the 12th, 25th, and 7th New York Volunteer Infantries had crossed. Other regiments crossed by the Aqueduct Bridge 1 mile to the north, while Ellsworth led the 11th New York Fire Swabs over the river by boat at dawn. The Federal steamer Pawnee, with its 8 large Dahlgren cannon, covered the Zouave advance. The Confederates had been warned an hour earlier under a flag of truce from the Pawnee to evacuate the town, which they did. The Swabs were to secure the railroad station, the telegraph office, and get the Confederate flag as an afterthought. Ellsworth and 4 men from Company A, along with the New York Tribune reporter E.H. House, went into the Marshall House. They encountered a barefooted man clad only in a shirt and trousers who said he was a boarder. Elmer sprang up the stairs to the 3rd floor and then up out into the roof to cut down the flag. As Ellsworth came down the stairs with the flag, he was killed instantly by a blast to the left chest from the shotgun of James Jackson. There are sketchy accounts of the very brief encounter. Now, these are just a series of artists' images of what they thought had happened. Another lithograph. This is probably the most accurate one because this is Corporal Brownell, Elmer. This gentleman here is E.H. House, the reporter. So, and then there were two other Zwav soldiers behind him. This is what House wrote in the newspaper. Quote, "We turned to descend, Corporal Brownell leading the way, and Ellsworth immediately following with the flag. As Brownell reached the first landing place, after a descent of some dozen steps, a man jumped from a dark passage and, hardly noticing Brownell, leveled a double-barreled shotgun square at Colonel's breast. Brownell made a quick pass to turn the weapon aside, but the fellow's hand was firm, and he discharged one barrel straight to its aim, and the slugs of buckshot with which it was loaded, entering the Colonel's heart and killing him at the instant. I think my arm was resting on poor Ellsworth's shoulder at the moment. At any rate, he seemed to fall almost from my grasp. He was on the 2nd or 3rd step from the landing, and he dropped forward with that heavy, horrible, headlong weight which comes of sudden death." Unquote. According to the book published by the Jackson family afterwards, the shooting was described somewhat differently. Ellsworth was coming down the stairs and was wrapping the flag around his body. He said, "I'll take the prize." Jackson raised his shotgun and said, "Yes, and here's another for you." The blast hit Ellsworth in the chest, killing him instantly. Jackson lowered the gun to fire at Corporal Francis Brownell of Troy, New York, but Brownell fired first and hit Jackson in the head with a mini ball. Jackson's second discharge hit the railing of the staircase. Brownell bayoneted Jackson immediately after he had discharged his musket. Jackson fell down the upper section of the 2nd landing. It is said that the blood of the 2 men intermingled. However, according to Jackson's autopsy, there were no bayonet piercings. Ellsworth's body was laid on a bed in a room nearby with the flag wrapped around his feet. The man who said he was only a boarder turned out to be Jackson. His hysterical wife hovered over his body. Later, Ellsworth's body was taken to the Navy Yard in Washington. Senator Henry Wilson and the reporter approached Lincoln at the White House, but he had already been informed of the death of Jackson. "I cannot talk. Ellsworth is dead, and it has unnerved me," he said. The President and Mrs. Lincoln viewed the body at the Navy Yard. A gold medal that he wore on his chest was found embedded near his spine. Non sol nobis, sed pro patrio. In Latin, that means not for ourselves, but for our country. Then Lincoln ordered Ellsworth's remains to be taken to the White House, where thousands paraded as his body lay in state there. The next day, the remains were taken to the train station amid large crowds, bands playing dirges, church bells tolling, and cannons firing. Ellsworth's men were enraged and threatened to burn the hotel down. They held the hotel's guests as hostages. Finally, they responded to officers' orders and moved to the outskirts of Alexandria, where they were put to work building Fort Ellsworth. Corporal Brownell sent a telegram to his father in Troy, New York. "Father, Colonel Ellsworth was shot dead this morning. I killed his murderer, Frank. Brownell was promoted to second lieutenant. Brownell later petitioned for a medal and eventually was awarded the Medal of Honor on his third request in 1877. Although his medal was awarded after the war, it was the first Medal of Honor to be awarded for action during the war. Jackson was buried in his old homestead on the Georgetown-Leesburg Turnpike. Lincoln later penned a letter of condolences to the family. Washington, D.C., May 25th, 1861. To the father and mother of Colonel Elmer E. Ellsworth. My dear sir and madam, in the untimely loss of your noble son, our affliction here is scarcely less than your own. So much of promised usefulness to one's country and of bright hopes for oneself and friends have rarely been so suddenly dashed as in his fall. In size, in years, and in youthful appearance, a boy only, his power to command men was surpassingly great. This power, combined with a fine intellect, an indomitable energy, and a taste altogether military, constituted in him, as it seemed to me, the best natural talent in that department I ever knew. And yet he was singularly modest and deferential in social intercourse. My acquaintance with him began less than 2 years ago, yet through the latter half of the intervening period, it was as intimate as the despair and my engrossing engagements would permit. To me, he appeared to have no indulgences or pastimes, and I never heard him utter a profane or an intemperate word. What was conclusive of his good heart, he never forgot his parents. The honors he labored for so laudably, and in the sad end so gallantly gave his life, he meant for them, no less than for himself. In the hope that it may be no intrusion upon the sacredness of your sorrow, I have ventured to address you in tribute to the memory of my young friend and your brave and early fallen child. May God give you the consolation that is beyond all earthly power. Sincerely, your friend in a common affliction, A. Lincoln. The body was then sent to New York City, where it lay in state in City Hall. Thousands lined up to view the cortege bearing Ellsworth's coffin to muffled drums and reversed arms. Then the coffin was taken by boat to Albany and Troy, and then by train to Mechanicville, where Ellsworth was buried in what was, for a number of years, an unmarked grave. At a requiem held at the site, quote, "Sleep on, brave young warrior. Narrow and silent is thy tent. The green mantle of thy mother earth shall enwrap thee. Thy nodding plume shall be the bent branches of the weeping willow. The robin shall sound for thee thy morning revelry. Thy bugle note shall be the sweet song of the oriole. All night long the watchfires of heaven's dome shall burn above thy bed, whence no alarm shall rouse thee," unquote. The 3-day mourning period and the extensive public viewing of his body, a practice not common before this, was made possible by the embalming of his corpse at the Navy Yard. Up to this time, embalming had been limited to preserving bodies for medical dissection. The success of Ellsworth embalmer Thomas Holmes in creating a lifelike corpse was widely reported in the national press and is credited with popularizing the practice. Some historians report that Holmes became independently wealthy after practicing his art on more than 4,000 Union soldiers during the next 4 years and selling his safe embalming solution to other undertakers. Remember Ellsworth became a rallying cry, and the 44th New York Volunteer Infantry was nicknamed Ellsworth's Avengers, with men selected from each of New York's counties. Throughout the conflict, his name, face, and valor would be recalled on stationery and sheet music and memorial lithographs. Relics associated with Ellsworth's death became prized souvenirs. By June 7th, it was reported that the interior of the house and all the furniture had been virtually stripped. The Smithsonian Institution and Bates College Special Collection Library have pieces of the Confederate flag that Ellsworth had when he was shot. The Fort Ward Museum in Alexandria dedicated a section of their museum to Ellsworth, displaying the kepi that he wore when he was killed. Patriotic envelopes bearing his image, a piece of the Confederate flag, on which Ellsworth's blood is visible, and the O from the Marshall House sign that a soldier took as a souvenir. On one side's villain is another side's patriot, of course. So Jackson was similarly celebrated in the South. And in 1862, a book was published, The Life of James W. Jackson, the Alexandria Hero. These are just some of the things that envelopes. This is a piece of the floor from the house, a piece of the flag at the Smith. Requiem, another postal cover, sheet. Of course, you gotta have a water pitcher. More music, a funeral march composed from. Of course, you gotta have tin soldiers. And many women wore a locket with his picture in it. During the Civil War, Lockwood Doty became chief of the newly formed Bureau of Military Statistics for New York State. Beginning in 1863 and continuing for decades after the war, veterans began depositing artifacts in the Bureau. This collection has evolved into the New York State Military Museum and now houses the largest collection of state battle flags in the country. More than 60% of the 1,700 flags are from the Civil War. At some point, Francis Brownell gave Jackson's shotgun, his own rifled musket, and a few other items related to the May 24th incident to the Bureau. He later wanted the material returned, and this was done by an act of the New York State Legislature. Later, Brownell gave the material to the Smithsonian, where it is still housed today, along with his own personal Medal of Honor. That's the English shotgun that Jackson had. That's Brownell's musket. In 1894, Brownell died, and his widow was offering to sell small pieces of the flag for $10 or $15 a piece. The New York State Museum had acquired the flag and Ellsworth uniform, showing the hole from the fatal shot. This aide is wearing the Ellsworth was. And you can see the bullet. There's the bullet hole here. Now this picture was taken around the centennial of the Civil War. In preparing for the centennial, the archivist at the New York State Military Museum felt that the blood-stained jacket of Ellsworth was too graphic. So in a decision that kind of stupefies preservationists today, the jacket was dry cleaned, removing all traces of Ellsworth's blood. The jacket and the flag have been on display in New York for various events, most recently the sesquicentennial of the Civil War, where it was displayed in the State Museum. Now, there's the jacket, close-up of the jacket with the... That's the flag. That's what New York State owns. The rest of the flag. You can get an idea of the size of the flag. This was being mounted to be displayed in the museum for the 150th anniversary of the Civil War. And you can see neat little rectangular pieces of the flag have been taken out and sold. But New York State acquired the bulk of the flag. In James Thompson, a graduate of Ames Academy in Mechanicville, gave a commencement speech entitled "The Unmarked Grave of Elmer Ellsworth." The speech caused great comment, leading to the organization of a group to erect a fitting memorial, a task that was completed in November of 1873 with an official unveiling of the monument on May 27th, 1874. The New York State Legislature footed a good part of the bill, but subscriptions and a donation from the 11th Regiment of Swabs helped cover the cost of the monument. The regiment had donated what was left from the money donated to the regiment for saving the Willard Hotel from fire. His grave the gravestone is 25 feet tall, is surrounded by a black iron fencing. It is topped by a 300-pound brass eagle. There's a plaque mounted on the base of the stone with the quote from his final letter to his parents. He who noteth even the fall of a sparrow will have some purpose, even in the fate of one like me. Now, what happened to the fire Zwaves? They were on guard duty in Alexandria until July 15, 1861, and then they were off to the First Battle of Bull Run, or First Manassas. In the battle on July 21st, this is a Don Troiani painting. In the battle on July 21st, the Fire Swabs, the Marines, and the 1st Minnesota were assigned to protect Griffin and Ricketts batteries on Henry Hill. The red shirts of the Zwaves and the blue uniforms of some of Jackson's troops initially confused both sides. Ricketts thought they were Federal troops until they were too close to fire and they got close enough to fire a volley into the guns. The Marines and the Zwaves broke. While regrouping, Jeb Stuart with 150 cavalry came out of the woods and initially thought the Fire Zwaves were Confederates until he saw that they were flying the U.S. flag. About 150 horsemen charged the 900 Fire Zwaves, who beat off the cavalrymen. By 2 p.m., the Zwaves had again taken position behind the guns on Henry Hill, along with the 14th Brooklyn. They were clothed the opposite. The Fire Zwaves had red shirts, blue leggings. The 14th Brooklyn Zwaves had red leggings and light blue jackets. The 33rd Virginia in their blue uniforms came up, and again, Ricketts initially believed them to be Federals and held fire. The 33rd fired a volley into the guns and then charged and captured the guns. The 14th Brooklyn recaptured the guns, but they were unable to hold them due to an artillery barrage. The Fire Zwaves and the 69th New York Volunteer Infantry, it will become the, it's the New York Volunteer Militia at this point. After Bull Run, they will become the Irish Regiment and the Irish Brigade, the 69th Volunteer Infantry. In the retreat of the Union Army, the Fire Zwaves served as the rear guard, where they suffered their highest casualties. Total casualties were about 180, with 35 killed, 75 wounded, and 70 missing, assumed captured. They were then stationed at Hampton Roads for the Peninsula Campaign, but saw little action. And on May 1862, they were sent back to New York City and were mustered out in June of 1862. The Fire Zwaves were a 3-month regiment. That's all anyone expected the war to go when they, the first part of the war. Many of them will re-enlist into the 17th New York Volunteer Infantry. Those that were captured were sent to, from last week, Castle Pinckney, where they remained for about a year, and then they were exchanged. Now, what about Zwaves in general? In the North, by 1865, there were at least 80 Zouave regiments, mostly raised in New York and Pennsylvania. The Confederate Army had one Zouave regiment, but about 25 Zouave companies within the various regiments. The most famous of these was the Louisiana Tigers. Most Southern Zouaves originated in South Carolina or in Louisiana. So These are the Ellsworth Avengers. The 5th New York, or the Duryea Swabs. Duryea Zwaves earned the title the Red-Legged Devils at the Battle of Gainesville in 1862. There's the 14th Brooklyn, 76 Pennsylvania. These are not clowns. These are the Louisiana Tigers, some of the Tiger uniforms. Now, most Zouave regiments did not wear the same type of uniforms in 1861 and 1862. They made easier targets in their bright, colorful uniforms. Also, it was hard to keep them maintained in the field. But the Zouave regiment, the 80 Zouave regiments, they had, if they had regular blue federal uniforms, they were allowed to put red, yellow, or green piping on the uniforms, or they were allowed to have a lighter blue jacket on the uniform to distinguish them as Zouaves. So the Zouaves at the end of the war will not be dressed as gaudily as the Zouaves at the beginning of the war. Well, Zouaves were present at the early part of the Civil War, and it is said that the last soldier killed at Appomattox about an hour before Grant and Lee signed the surrender was a Zouave from the 155th Pennsylvania. Oops. Now, I don't know how we got to that. I want to, well, there's a man, the only thing left is this man's picture over here. And the picture of the monument. In 1997, there's a quote that I like to use occasionally to kind of bring the Civil War up to today. Just bring it back. Oops. There's a. Well, we'll continue without that. A question that comes up: was Ellsworth really the first Union officer killed in the war? The Camp Jackson affair was an incident in Missouri. Missouri voted to remain within the Union, but they also voted to not help either side with manpower or weapons or military aid. The governor of Missouri, Governor Jackson, not related to the Jackson who kills Ellsworth, and not related to Stonewall Jackson. Jackson was a Southern sympathizer, and so he sent secret messages to Jefferson Davis and said, the large federal arsenal in St. Louis has 40,000 muskets stored there. If you send me several cannon and guns, we will capture the arsenal and turn the state to the Confederacy. 4 cannon and about 700 rifles were sent by steamboat to St. Louis, disguised as Italian marble to be built, used in building of a mansion in St. Louis. Now, to get his men ready, Jackson ordered the state militia, who were primarily Southern sympathizers, to meet at Camp Jackson, where they were to start drilling. They were to be ready, so to speak, for the guns when they arrived. Captain Lyon, a Union officer, became aware of this, and he organized Union forces and a regiment of regular army that was nearby, and they attacked Fort Jackson or Camp Jackson. And they basically captured about 700 soldiers there. At Camp Jackson, they had no weapons, so there was really not much of a fight. It was just the armed Union forces surrounded the camp, and the men surrendered. The men were then marched into St. Louis. Now, St. Louis was like Baltimore in that there was a lot of Southern sympathy within the city itself. And as they marched the Confederates into the city, civilians began throwing rocks at Captain Lyon and his men. It's unclear what happened next, but a drunkard apparently fired a pistol into the ranks of the soldiers, mortally wounding Captain Constantine Blandowski. The soldiers then fired into the crowd and killed 28, some of whom were women and children, and wounding some 50 others. This polarized the state, and most people took sides. Now, it appears then that Blandowski may be the first Union officer killed in the Civil War, because this occurs on May 10th. And indeed, the head curator for the New York State Military Museum in Saratoga, New York, where Ellsworth's uniform is, and where the flag is stored when it's not being displayed, took down the exhibit that indicated that Ellsworth was the first Union officer killed in the war. And I saw this, that he'd taken it down. And so I did a little research on Captain Blandowski, and on Find a Grave, I was able to find Blandowski's gravestone in the cemetery somewhere in St. Louis. And the gravestone has on it Captain Blandowski, Constantine Blandowski, his date of birth, date of death, and on the bottom of the stone it says first Union officer killed in the Civil War. But the date of death is May 25th. And that's because Captain Blandowski is mortally wounded by the soldier, by the pistol shot on May 10th. He undergoes amputation of his leg, and he will die of gangrene on May 25th. Ellsworth dies on May 24th. So Ellsworth indeed remained. So I sent the picture of the stone to the curator at the museum in Saratoga, and they quickly put up the sign again that Ellsworth was the first Union officer killed in the war. Now, the story really doesn't end here, and the quote I'd like to use is from Bernard DeVoto, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian, and he writes, "The Civil War is the crux of our history. You cannot understand any part of our history from the first day of the Constitutional Convention down to this morning without arriving back at the Civil War." And it's a quote I like to use to kind of like bring the Civil War up to today. And this quote applies to the marker for Ellsworth. In 1997, now this is in Mechanicville, just north of Albany. I'm in practice in Albany at the time, and living just south of Albany. In the summer of 1997, the Eagle was stolen from its 25-foot tall monument. In the late 90s, historical items were commanding a high money value on the collector's market. It was evident that there were attempts to also knock the bolts off the bronze plaque holding the quote on it, but this was unsuccessful. The theft occurred during the evening or night and had to involve the use of a truck with a crane on it to get a 300-pound eagle off a 25-foot tall monument. There was no evidence that the iron fence that surrounds the monument was damaged, and there was no indication that the eagle was allowed to drop down to the base, which would have damaged the eagle and certainly left some gouges in the granite or marble on the base. No one knew exactly when it was stolen, because even though the cemetery sits behind some houses, over the years, pine trees along the outskirts of the cemetery had grown up, blocking the view of the monument from these houses. The police didn't even have a picture of the monument to do anything about it. And they were not particularly hopeful that the eagle would be recovered. Fortunately, a member of the George L. Willard Camp 154 of the Sons of Union Veterans had some close-up pictures of the eagle that he provided to the police. The Sons also sent an article to the National Civil War newspaper and contacted the Ellsworth Ice Cream Company to put up a reward for return of the eagle. And there was a lot of local publicity about it on TV and news radio stations. They also found that there's an antique dealer's website where antique dealers talk to each other, and they put out a picture and a story about the monument on that website. On December 13th, 1997, a Atlantic auction gallery of Sagamore, Massachusetts, saw the posting and realized that they had the eagle. The authorities were contacted, and within a week, the eagle was back in Mechanicville. It had passed through several dealers since its theft, and they had a pretty good description of the initial seller. The man suspected was this gentleman here, 43-year-old Gary Evans, a resident of Troy, New York, and a well-known art theft who had a whole list of convictions. At age 16, 90 days in jail for breaking into a house. At age 23, sent to the Clinton Correctional Facility for burglary, paroled. 1980, quickly back in jail for receiving stolen property, escapes from the county jail, sent to Utica. He became interested in antiques, passed himself off as an antique dealer. In 1985, he kills one of the members of his own gang who he suspected was stealing merchandise from him. But the police found the body, but didn't know who had killed him. 4 months later, Evans was arrested for robbery, sent to Sing Sing, paroled in 1988. 4 months after he is paroled, he kills an antique dealer during a robbery in Watertown, New York. In 1989, he kills another member of his gang. No body found, but no one knew about the death at that time. In 1991, he killed another coin dealer and jewelry dealer in upstate New York. In 1993, he stole over 800 antiques from a group shop in Vermont and used a crane, talking about modus operandi, to steal a 1,000-pound bronze bench from the Albany Rural Cemetery. His fence turned him in, and he was sent to prison again. He was released in 1994, having made a deal with the police to obtain information on another prisoner suspected of killing, so he was a snitch. Police still did not suspect him in any of the 4 murders he had at this point. Several months after his release, he stole the first edition Audubon book valued at over $300,000 from Union College, in the library in Union College in Schenectady, New York. He was caught and sent to federal prison, but he negotiated a shortened sentence if he agreed to return the book undamaged. After his release in 1996, he stole $80,000 in antique jewelry and with a third member of his gang. Evans suspected this member of of his gang framed the original member of the gang killed back in '85. So Evans had his third friend shot and dismembered. Finally, suspecting something, the police had a nationwide manhunt, and he was finally found living in a tent in northern Vermont as a survivalist in May of 1998. Now, although the police had 5 murders that they thought they could link him to, they had no real good evidence. But he kind of surprised the police and confessed to all the deaths, led the police to the bodies of the gang members that had not yet been found. In August 1998, he was indicted on 8 counts of murder. And on August 14th, 1998, I remember this day very well because it was my wife and our anniversary. He was being transported from the Rensselaer County Jail to Albany Court for an arraignment. He was in a state police cruiser, and on the bridge over the Hudson River, he kicked out the side window of the car, jumped out, and started running, leapt over the railing, and plunged to his death on a mud flat about 90 feet below. Now, it wasn't certain whether he was committing suicide or whether he was trying to escape, because what they found on his body, up his nose, they found a handcuff key, and taped to his leg, he had a razor, which he obviously had acquired in the Rensselaer County Jail with their great security there. He had given his lawyer a note only to be opened should something happen to him. And so the lawyer opened the note, and it was released to the press. And it read, my lessons here are learned. On to a better place now. My friends are happy, and I'm already there. I win. So that brought the Civil War right close to me in Albany, New York, on my wedding anniversary. In the 2011, on the sesquicentennial of Ellsworth's death, a special postal cancellation was done, and anyone interested in it can look at it up here. 150 years earlier, as the country moved to war, young men instilled with patriotic fervor answered the call. This was going to be settled in one glorious battle, was the initial impression. Ellsworth's letter to his parents and his sweetheart, and Lincoln's letters to his parents afterwards, were all poignant and heartfelt. But they were just the precursors of a flood of letters that would be written as the war progressed. The poetic words spoken at his requiem would not be heard over the makeshift graves of tens of thousands of men who would be hurriedly buried on battlefields where they fell. Even more would die ingloriously of disease. As the war went on, very few would be remembered on envelopes or sheet music or lockets. Ellsworth's premonition that his country would require his blood immediately was correct, but the message was missed by most. This war was going to require the blood of hundreds of thousands of promising, ambitious, hopeful young men. Thank you. Questions? Yes. He was 25. No. She did not marry for a number of years, and then she did marry. The Meg Rowling, who published this book, First Fallen, has been able to find many of his letters that she had kept. Any other questions? Now next week's question. Did you know that contracts signed in a bank in Troy, New York, doomed the British Wooden Navy? That's the question. Contracts signed in a bank in Troy, New York, doomed the British Wooden Navy. This came up.
Oh, wow.
I
saw it on my screen.
Yeah, I don't know how, that's what we got out here.
That's so funny. I wanted to see if there was any questions in the chat box.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. This is that whole thing okay. Yeah, good.